Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Emily Hacker. She is a internal communication strategist, writer, and certified communication management professional with over 10 years of experience transforming communication strategies in various industries. Welcome to the show, Emily.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
You are welcome to the show. You are welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure a lot of people here will benefit from all what we are talking about. We'll be talking about the power of internal communication. And not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from it all. Now, tomorrow, and day after, whenever it is. So let's talk about, my first question to you, Emily, is to understand itself. What is internal communication in today's time? Let's go with the basics and then we branch out from there.
Yeah. So the definition I like to use for internal communication is it's the exchange of messages, ideas, and information within an organization. And that can happen at any level of the organization. So it can happen from the top down, meaning your top brass, the C-suite, the chief executives, the frontliners who are typically at the bottom up, or perhaps they're an individual contributor, and then anything in between. So really what I like to remind people is that we all have a role to play within internal communication. It's not just the sole responsibility of the team who has internal communication in their job titles. We all have this shared responsibility and this shared ownership. So it's this idea, I like to also explain it as a newsroom of sorts. So you can think of the internal communication team, if there is a team at your organization, as the news hub. So these are the people who are that dissemination of information, ideas, keeping people on the same track, helping everyone understand how their piece of the puzzle fits into the greater picture that is the larger organization.
Right. So how does it work? Because you see nowadays this a lot of this talk is on employee engagement, leadership crisis, great resignation, quiet quitting, and in that a lot of mid-size especially and bigger organization obviously they have this internal communications team. But who is the head of such a team and who handles that loudspeaker, as you can say? They are the ones who disseminate the information. So who has that power to to hold that loudspeaker?
Well, really, anyone within the organization has the power of internal communication. With email, Slack, Viva Engage, formerly known as Yammer, it has democratized internal communication in a way that we all have that shared ownership that I was talking about before. But there is typically at least one person within the organization who has internal communication somewhere in their job description. Ideally, you would have someone like myself, who is a dedicated internal communication professional, who has that practical experience in the field, as well as the educational background. But sometimes you might have someone in the organization who is taking on internal communication responsibilities in addition to their other responsibilities. They may be an office manager, they may be an assistant to one of the executives. So internal communication is being very much done off the side of their desk. So in those cases, you would typically want to coach the organization to invest in an individual who would be the internal communication professional. So in the short answer to your question is really we all have a role to play, but sometimes it's a small team of individuals and they can report to anyone within an organization. I've seen internal communication functions reporting to human resources, finance, IT. I've been typically reporting to marketing functions in my career. Really, it's kind of a mix depending on the value the organization sees in internal communication and who wants to take on that responsibility of overseeing it.
Right. Let's look at it this way. A lot of talk always is about the external communication. You have the public relations and you are reaching out to the whole world and trying to talk about great things that your organization is doing and forget about all the wrong things your organization is doing, or you try to do whatever it so that it does not come out. But then you see there is the whole issue of the customer. People generally forget about the customer and there is a lot of this debate about it. So many online forums are there about talking about how organizations have not treated them so well. So many cases have been there where companies had to shell out money because they were not very good with the customer. Now let's look at the internal communication. And outside also there is so much of talk about leadership crisis. Internally, again, we talk about the toxic workplaces. We talk about leadership crisis. We talk about less employee engagement. And right now, a lot of talk is happening about quiet quitting. So what is this about? External communication, it is not going anywhere. It is not working. And internal communication itself, internally, it seems it's going through a crisis. How would you like to look at these words that I'm trying to bring forth in terms of almost like a reality? Not every organization, but almost in if you want to really look at it in the right manner, you find that a lot of organizations, a lot of communication that is happening, it does not seem to be going in the right direction. How do you want to look at it, especially the internal communication side, if you want to truly look at it, and not just just you can say, like they say, they use this word greenwashing. Here you can say some great sort of a washing, whatever it is. Let us understand in the true sense as internal communication should be, but actually it is not happening in the main. And who is responsible for this?
So you bring up an interesting point about that balance between external communication versus internal communication. And you've quite rightly pointed out that the emphasis does tend to be on customer or client facing communication. So I like to remind people that there really needs to be a balance between the employee experience and the customer experience. It's not a one or the other situation because quite often in industries, your employees are the ones who are working directly with clients and customers. So if they're having a terrible experience, there's ineffective or non-existent communication within the organization, that is going to transition to your client and your customer, and they will feel that. And that is, again, so we have to have that balancing act between effective internal and effective external communication. Going back to your point about just that imbalance, I see this quite often in the organizations that I've worked with, who are typically US based organizations. There always is this emphasis on public relations, external communication, sales, and marketing, because those very clearly have a direct impact on businesses' bottom lines. There's the revenue, the return on investment, all of these different metrics that you can point to very easily with marketing and public relations and say, well, we did this, and therefore we attracted X number of clients. And what you forget typically is that internal communication can do all of those things too. So, what I often see is that organizations forget to measure or bring in metrics for internal communication. We can measure things too that directly impact our return on investment. The internal communication that we do does have an impact on employee turnover and retention. You talked about the employee engagement crisis too. And when you have effective communication, as research has shown, you get more productive, higher performing, more satisfied employees. So, by emphasizing both employee experience and customer experience, you can create that great client experience that we were looking for. And you also create that great employee experience that keeps people excited, connected, recognized, and engaged within the organization.
Right, right, Emily. Does our internal communication have the power to say communicate what is the truth, or is it only that the CEO or whoever they report to, they dictate that things? Because uh, if it were 100%, the right things would always be talked about, then there will be not so much of employee disengagement and leading to great resignation. So how does it work? If it is, how do internal communication people work if there is not much of own use of your own talent or talking about the right things? Because a lot of organizations are not in good shape regarding this method. External, I talked about external communication. Why do everyone want to talk about outside also the great things, inside also how great we are, and second day there are the layoffs, and the internal communication is brought to draft out such great words, along with the external communication you put out this. How do you look at it? What should a person who wants to get into internal communication, what should they learn? Or should they actually unlearn everything and just follow the orders, and you will be very nice in an internal communication job? A lot of organizations, you are an internal communication strategist. What do these people discuss about? Do they about that talk about that our internal communication team is not working well, so you suggest ideas? How does, I'm trying to understand. It's almost like, a dark world about internal communication actually for the outside world.
So I like to look at internal communication professionals as strategic partners and executive counselors to our organizations. So no, I don't think we need to unlearn everything we've learned as professionals to this point or in our educational background in communication. It's a matter of establishing trust with your key leaders. So quite often I see organizations who haven't worked with communication professionals, they've worked primarily with what I would call communication practitioners. And how I differentiate that is that practitioners are those who have been tasked with an organization to execute communication. And they may or may not have the same training and background as someone like myself who has multiple degrees and certifications in communication. So they're kind of unaware of what they don't know. It's the classic I don't know what I don't know. So if the C-level anything comes to them, to your point, they may just blindly follow, say, okay, well, you, Mr. CEO or Ms. CEO, you would like an email to go out about this. I'm going to go ahead and send that email because I don't know how to lead a conversation with you to position myself as a strategic partner rather than just an executor. So if you have someone like myself who's a communication professional, we'll open up conversations with our leaders. We'll approach it with the respect, of course, for their position and just show them and also tell them this is what we could be doing, that this is the power. If you're an authentic, transparent leader, you're going to build trust with your employees. And again, we can point to research that shows that organizations that have leaders who are seen as effective have happier, more satisfied employees who believe in what their leaders are telling them. They believe in that shared vision, they're excited about it, and they want to stay a part of that organization. So it's really that balancing act of how do we shape that narrative around internal communication? And if you're not actively doing that and changing that narrative and bringing your C-level on board or whoever your key stakeholders are within the organization, they won't know. Well, this, if we did this, well, we could reach our frontline employees more effectively. We could foster that trust, that transparency, that authenticity that we're all looking for and audiences crave.
Right, right, Emily. Leaders keep on changing. A CEO may change, a marketing head may change. So, in terms of internal communication, how do you calibrate your, because this is a very different function. It is not like a sales job that you are still working with a marketing, you know what to do. But communication is totally a bit different. It's a much of a mental thing, and organize and leaders may see things very differently. How do you calibrate with the leaders? And many a times leaders may not understand this part. They may be very, very, very active people. They just think that, okay, I will communicate everything and nothing, so I will be just talking to my employees and they will be happy. How does it work? How do you tell them what is the right way to do things? How do you actually calibrate and keep your job as well as make sure that the leader also keeps his job, because they can also make mistakes and get fired?
Oh, yes. Everyone makes mistakes. Part of the beauty of internal communication is that you're going to experiment. You're going to test and learn because audiences and organizations are very different. So, as you're approaching conversations with C-level people or whoever, again, your key stakeholders are, I typically do a communication roadshow. So, roadshow is that one of those fabulous jargony terms, basically just walking you through. Here's what we are. Here's what we do. So, I'll walk senior leaders or whoever my key stakeholders are through that. I'll start with who am I? What is my educational background? Very much like you introed me in today's conversation, walking through, okay, I've worked in these industries. Here's my approach to things. So I'll introduce myself. Then I'll walk through the key pillars that I see as how effective internal communication professionals approach it. So you identify yourself as a strategic partner, emphasizing that we are not a purely tactical function and that we can be your strategic partner, having those conversations about your organizational goals and objectives, and then how I, as a communication professional, can help achieve that and bring everyone along on that journey too. Then there's the role of executive counselor too, that we are there as a resource for everyone within the organization who has questions about how to more effectively communicate. I love getting questions from everyone across the organization, especially from our key stakeholders and senior leaders who come to me and say, hey, Emily, I've got this presentation coming. I'm not sure how I should structure this. Can you give me some pointers on how I can best convey my message in the way that it will achieve the results that I want? So I love having those conversations because, again, it positions you to be that executive counselor and to be in the room advising, this is something that we need to share with the organization. You raised the concern earlier about organizations holding information back. And there are certainly going to be times due to confidentiality agreements that you cannot, for legal purposes, share everything with everyone in your organization. But as a communication professional, you come in with that communication mindset saying, okay, well, this is going to be a huge change that impacts everyone in the organization over this period of time. Well, we need to start prepping them for that. And here's how we do it. So opening those conversations, being storytellers too. So much of what I do during every day is creating stories because that is such an important thing as a human. Stories resonate with us. Conversations that you're telling through this platform and any other platform, people are looking for those stories, and that's what resonates. And we can do that as the communication professionals. And sometimes our leaders are really great storytellers, they're really great natural communicators, but they can benefit from having those more storytelling conversations led by the internal communication team.
Right. Tell us one thing, is that why certain organizations come out as very bad in terms of bad employee engagement or bad working conditions, in spite of them having such a rosy image. And this part you cannot separate from that image. They may, people may not, may tolerate them because the type of services or the type of engagement you have, it is a necessity in today's time. You can recall several organizations, I don't want to take names here, but they only exist because they are powerful. But the day they are not, they will cease to exist. And so how would you like to say, tell someone that this is not the right kind of internal communication, this is not what it should be? So I want to understand, why is it that they fail in this internal communication regard? Is it deliberate? Is it that they don't care? Or is it that somebody has not done their job properly?
Sometimes it's a little bit of both. It's always interesting to see how organizations position themselves outside the walls. Everyone typically in today's world talks about, oh, we're a people oriented company. We believe in diversity, inclusion, belonging. We are empowering our female colleagues and all of this. And you have to say all of this in many of today's worlds. But then it's interesting to look what is happening inside. And that is kind of the mystery. Unless you're in that environment, you can't see the mismatch between the external and the internal. So when I'm choosing organizations to work with and for, I always like to look for organizations that are quite balanced. And sometimes you won't know that until you're within the organization. And it's challenging to be in my position as an internal communication professional and work for an organization that isn't walking the walk. They're just talking the talk because it sounds good to the public sphere. But in reality, it's a very different experience for your employees. And that's challenging for me in my type of role and for my peers as well who find themselves in similar positions. If we're disseminating information to our colleagues in the organization that is quite honestly not true to what is happening within the organization, it becomes that cognitive dissonance of I'm saying something that I don't believe in and I'm not comfortable with what's happening. So you raise an interesting question. And for me, the quite honest answer is if you find yourself in that position as an internal communication professional or any employee within an organization, and you see that the values they're preaching externally don't match what's happening internally, perhaps it's time to walk away and find something that does better align with your values and what you believe in. So there is, quite honestly, in my experience, no way to coach an organization effectively. You can raise those concerns, you can work through your network. You should be in a position of trust, and ideally you would be well respected within the organization so that your voice would be heard and would be considered. And if you are having those conversations and they're slowly but surely making progress, great. But if not, it's probably time to walk away from that organization.
Absolutely, absolutely. There is much to learn about these things. You have written a book on this. Me, myself, and I see a guide to building internal communication as a team of one. Tell us about this so that people who are not able to consult you, at least they can consult this book.
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting. When I was 26 years old, I took on my first role as an internal communication lead of a team of one. And I had been working in communication for a number of years prior to that. And I had worked very closely within the internal communication space, but I never led a team of one. And when I came into that space, I basically said, well, where are the resources? Where are the tools? Where are the blogs? Where are the podcasts that walk me through the process of how do I stand up and restart an internal communication function, because the organization I was working for at the time had someone doing internal communication before me, but the position had been vacant for quite some time. So it was essentially restarting this incredibly valuable function. And what I discovered as I dug into this was that the organization saw communications as a copy paste send factory, where they would send us copy for an email and say, okay, go send this out. And I had been in communication long enough that I knew that is not how we do things. We are the strategic partners. We need to shift that conversation. And I was craving those resources. How do I do this? I had someone above me who was in communication, but he wasn't focused specifically on internal communication. So it was very much my responsibility to restart this function. And I found that challenge incredibly exciting, because I dug into the research and saw how powerful internal communication was, and said, okay, well, I've got to shift this narrative. And I spent 3 years transforming the organization from that copy paste send factory I mentioned to being that strategic partner, with C-suite level people coming to me and asking me questions of, okay, I have to communicate this message, or I think this should be a message we communicate. How do we do this, Emily? And having a much more partnership with the organization. So this book was a result of those 3 years and the years since that I have spent building internal communication teams from the ground up as a team of one. And it is very much the roadmap and the guidebook that I would have loved to have had, because as I've been in this space for a number of years now, I've realized how many of us are teams of one or none in a lot of cases. And it's often, as I mentioned earlier in a conversation, people who are taking on internal communication responsibilities in addition to their other day-to-day tasks. They could be doing something else within the organization, and they have no idea what they're doing in internal communication because it's not their expertise. And someone has just said, well, we need someone to lead internal communication, and you've got some bandwidth. It's you. So this book is really written for people like myself who have found themselves in internal communication teams of one, where they're shoring it up, they're restarting it. It's also for the people who oversee the function too. So what can you do to help restart this function? How can you make sure that you find the right people to do this work? And then it's really for anyone within organizations who are just curious about, what is internal communication? What should I be looking for? And how could my organization do it better?
Right, right, Emily. One last question I want to understand from you is that it's now the age of artificial intelligence. Let's look at the organizations. Empathy was gone, and then people were trying to write emails which were, only words. They were trying to still written by humans with some feeling, at least even to just show it off that, okay, even you pretend it. Now the first draft, a lot of organizations are insisting about the first draft written by an artificial intelligence tool. Earlier without empathy, and now the artificial intelligence does not have feelings. How will you refine the first draft which is written by something which has, how do you put feelings into it and then put it out to the stakeholders? Help me understand the shift that's going on. What would you like to say to this?
Yeah. I had someone, when ChatGPT came on the scene, was it last year, who said to me, because I have a history as a copywriter too, they said, Emily, are you worried? Are you worried for this? Because this could take your job. And I said, no, I'm not worried at all. I see it as a tool to enhance productivity. So for the people who are not natural writers, or who struggle to create quick subject lines or headlines, AI is fantastic. It gets people started. But to your point, it doesn't mirror your voice and tone and style as an individual. So if you're using AI to ghostwrite the first draft of a script for a CEO as they're giving a presentation somewhere, you're going to have to take that draft and take that, just as we said, as a draft. It is not one and done. It's missing that personality that AI, as of yet, cannot quite mirror. It's getting close, and I'm sure within the next few years, it will be scarily close. But you have to be so specific with these prompts too, and you'd probably have to feed in some examples if you wanted to have this voice, tone, and style that is very indicative of the individual you're writing for on behalf of. So the short answer is, I'm not concerned, but you have to add that human element at the end or at the beginning to ensure that the style and tone and voice that's coming through these written pieces from AI also match what you would say in a conversation with someone, because your employees will notice if your CEO is very polished and professional when they're speaking, and then they get an email that has a series of emojis and a lot of slang and a lot of jargon from AI. They're going to notice this difference, and they're going to think, what is happening? This isn't the leader. I'm seeing a mismatch in behavior here. So your point, you have to add that human component at some point in the stage. It's, to me, ChatGPT and other similar services are a great starting point. They help people who are shy or a little concerned about their writing. It evens the playing field at the beginning stages, but you also have to add that human editing component at the end too.
Absolutely, absolutely. As long as the writing has to be for human, a human needs to be writing that stuff at the end of it, whatever the first draft, second draft, or third draft be. But be that as it may, there are a lot of people who would like to, learn more from you, and that can only happen directly from you. What's the best way for them to connect with you, and also those who want to be professionally engaged with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so anyone is welcome to connect with me. I'm sharing content, other tips like the ones we've talked about today several times each week, so they're welcome to connect with me on that platform. I also have my professional website, which is www.emily-hecker.com, so they can read all of my blogs on there as well. There's information about my book, and there's a way to connect with me as well on that platform. And I would love to hear from anyone what's working in your organization when it comes to internal comms, what's not, all of that. I'm always interested to hear from other professionals.
Absolutely. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.